Dear colleagues, can you hear us? Good afternoon, evening, morning, whatever time you are living in. Hi, Joan. Is it comfortable for you? Or shall we wait a bit for you taking a better, comfortable location? Hi, everyone. We're still waiting for Yanis Lianas to reaching us. He's going through Moscow snow, you know. All roads are blocked. Has to go through. Snow is falling. It's difficult to get through. Jingle bells, helping him. You know, it's like he's riding his one horse sleigh. Yeah. So I hope the dear Rudolph or Rudolph the deer is helping him, working hard. We have a number of actually extra participants to our small working group on eco-antitrust project. Let me introduce some of our old new colleagues who are with us for quite a while, but just joined this particular project recently. Svetlana Avdasheva and Svetlana Golovanova, both professors of HSC. I don't know, can you see them? No. Can we turn the camera here? No, can't. Okay. Maybe you can say a word and then they will hear you. Yeah, you can use a mic and just introduce. Please introduce yourself. Just and if you because you camera will.
Well, dear colleagues, I'm Svetlana Avdasheva, professor of economics in High School of Economics, Faculty of Economic Sciences. Thank you.
And I'm Svetlana Golovanova. So we are colleagues. I'm actually from High School of Economics from another campus from Nizhny Novgorod. It's another city in Russia, but we are colleagues and we are working together and we have an experience of working with Alexey Ivanov. And so we hope we'll be useful and good members of the team.
We are already very useful members of the team. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us these difficult times. So we're getting together offline, but with a number of colleagues online. And I see Professor Alla Varlamanova with us. Hello, Alla. Alla represents Moscow State University. So we're growing. Eco-antitrust movement is growing quickly because that's sustainable ecosystem of antitrust scholars. Yeah, so we're engaging with more people and bringing them in. That's how basically eco-antitrust conquers the world. So I would suggest we wait 2 minutes for Yanis Lianas join us, and then we start with the presentation, which can we check whether he's around already? Yeah. I think he's already somewhere getting up by stairs. Most of us of you already seen my presentation, but I want to repeat it just for sake of clarity and maybe a bit adding some nuances here and there. And those who were not part of the presentation or of this discussions earlier, they could have a chance to hear like as a new story. And today we have the following program, or at least it's perceived like this, but we can always deviate because we are flexible like any living ecosystem. As a living ecosystem, we want to be flexible. We want to react to the changing environment. So our perception that we start with my presentation, then the floor goes to Elena Rovenskaya, who is with us today offline, here sitting on my right hand. Then we would have both Svetlanas commenting on this, Professor Joan Cui, Professor Nicola Zingales, and Yanis Lianas, of course, who hopefully will be with us very soon. Then we have Bjorn Landqvist with us, also offline. They can't see you until you're speaking. Yeah, you should press a button. Press.
Hello, here I am in person, and I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you. Yes, and I like to hear you. I need to depart a little bit earlier, but I'm looking forward for the development of this. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think Elena didn't greet everyone yet offline. She's also with us. I think we should celebrate this.
Hello, everybody from the other side of the screen.
Great. I think very dynamic. And yes, we have also another mathematician with us, Evgeny Ivankov from Institute of Mathematics and Mechanics from Yekaterinburg, Russian Federation. Evgeny, are you with us? Can you say?
Yes, hello. Nice to meet you.
Can't hear you, can't see you. Please, once again.
I'm sorry, I can't turn on my camera. Only sound.
You don't have a camera. Okay. But maybe you can adjust it and then we can enjoy your presence as well. Okay. Akai, yes, for sure. Kai is with us. Kai, are you with us?
Yes. I'm glad. It's great to meet the new friends here. I'm here. I'm listening.
Great, Kai. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
so that's pretty much the whole set of speakers today. And we all have our colleagues from International Competition Law and Policy Center of the BRICS countries. And probably Yanis is already joining. Do we have any news from Yanis? Is on his way? Is inside the building. Okay. So it's not anymore Rudolph's fault. So he's on his feet. He just cut it down. Okay, great. So maybe let's wait for Yanis to join the room, say hello to everybody, and then we start. Yeah? Any objections? No? We start without Yanis. Okay, so everyone wants to start. So, and here we go. I say a couple of words. What is Eco-Antitrust Project about? Basically, we want to bring sustainability to digital ecosystem. That's the goal. And we understand the sustainable development goals and sustainability discussion is a key element of the modern discourse of competition law and policy all around the world, from Europe to smaller countries, developing world, from US to China, everywhere we hear sustainability is an essential element of a new architecture of the global economy. So how to bring sustainability to the digital economy, which is actually, and that's confirmed by number of experts all around the world. Oh, I see Elena is joining us also online. Oh, here and there. Great. Oh, Yanis, hello, please take a seat. You can join us here. You'll be more visible. Visible for what? For people. How was your trip? I don't know. Through the winter Moscow. Was good, yeah. Rudolph the deer was efficient, bringing you in. I thought you were like on the Rudolph. No, did you use a deer? No, a slate? No. Yes. Okay, just say hello to everyone. If you...
So hello to everyone. Very nice to be with you here, and I'm sorry for being late to this meeting. So.
Okay, so we start. So as I said, sustainability debate is all around, and that's a very important parameter of modern competition policy and how we actually perceive competition in the marketplace. And digital economy is one of the most unbalanced part of the global economy, because we see enormous monopolization of the marketplace, a lot of new abusive and exploitative practices happening. And so we want to ask a question to ourselves, and authorities all around the world are actually looking for a solution how to bring sustainability to the digital economy and digital ecosystems in the first place. So as we know, businesses already are eco-thinking. So all the major platforms, they build ecosystems around them. So that's what they're doing. They already focus on their businesses, the operation of their industries, of their kind of platforms as a form of living organism, as a kind of ecosystem which surrounds them. And we heard from business leaders from Alibaba to Microsoft that ecosystem is a new form of business organization. This form of business organization was promoted by academia. Back in 1993, in his seminal paper, James Moore already called for ecological approach for businesses and for business strategies, so calling basically for becoming business, so for business to become eco-thinking and eco-acting in their behavior, and any kind of diligent manager, diligent CEO of any company should be understanding what type of ecosystem he lives in or his business lives in, and in which type of ecosystems he has to compete with, in what type of, you know, ecological niche his corporation, his company is fitting best. And this actually line of thought was developing quite intensively in the last 20 or so years, and we see a number of papers which went out.
Сейчас я выключу все. Да, ага.
Алла, вы включились, наоборот, они выключились.
Ой, одну секунду, одну секунду.
Ага. Okay, so business, a lot of literature we're developing this line of thinking, and we see a lot of business strategists actually publishing on this topic. As a result, we see growing scholarship how businesses should adapt themselves to new kind of form of competition, new ecology of competition, as James Moore put it. And actually, that's a type of behavior business very used to. So in number of previous cases, like when antitrust was actually developed as a field, as a part of the legal enterprise, businesses were already kind of trying to adapt rapidly to the new environment, and the most vocal case was a Standard Oil, which Britannica Encyclopedia called a mother trust, basically calling it a maze of legal structures, which were actually avoiding all sort of regulations and all sort of surveillance and scrutiny, and that was the way how Standard Oil was avoiding all sorts of attempts to control its behavior, its growth, its market power. So basically, this type of behavior, adaptive strategy, is very kind of intrinsic quality or feature characteristic of any businesses from the very early age of antitrust development. So nothing new basically under the moon, but what changed that businesses got their methodology of a new ecology of competition, which business is employing right now, has employed already, and all the leading companies, they taking this as a form of their business organization or their business strategy, they already there. Industrial firms of the past, which, and let me skip this, and I just come directly here, and then come back. Sorry. Yeah, no, I will follow this. Yeah, so digital ecosystems, their characteristics in a modern time could be characterized like adaptive, dynamic, agile, with blurred boundaries between different sectors of the business organization. So you can't really say what is this in actually what type of organization you can see. Even Jack Ma, the CEO of one of the businesses, called himself a blind man riding on a blind tiger, which is a form of self-perception he promoted among business leaders, saying like, actually, we don't really understand what we are ruling, what kind of governed body is under our management. It's very different from industrial firm organizations of the past or in the industrial economy, like Henry Ford in total kind of opposing way called his business extremely well-planned enterprise, and an enterprise which was planned in each and every detail with extreme care, as he was saying. And this type of conveyor or the assembling line, which Ford introduced as a form of business organization of the industrial economy, which is static, well-defined, discrete individual parts got together and very structured. So this is the difference we can see in the modern economy, the difference in form of business organization. So ecosystems grow sometimes beyond the control of the organizers of these ecosystems. Let's say, according to Ekbia and Nerdy or some other scholars, basically the participation of millions of people in those ecosystems are seen as a form of free labor, and that is prosumers type of, complementers who combine all together elements of production and consumption in one kind of person, in one function. And that's a very new type of business organization, which is taking place, especially in digital ecosystems. In this sense, regulation should be adapted as well, but it's lagging behind. It's lagging behind because the modern regulation, modern laws, modern system of organization of the marketplace through laws, through legal mechanisms, is basically designed according to industrial principles, industrial organization, and the digital economy and digital businesses, digital ecosystems, they flow around these rock solid laws of the past of industrial time. And we see that laws are in sort of mechanistic trap, as Karpe and Matei put it. And I think it's very right that basically we see laws being very much lagging behind the pace of change of businesses, of business structures. This type of approach, mechanistic approach, industrial approach to regulation of digital economy, on globally digital economy, leads us to a fragmentation of the global regulatory framework. Basically, same type of behavior is perceived differently by different jurisdictions, by different authorities. And it reminds me kind of a tale of several, wise men or wizards, dealing with blind wizards, dealing with an elephant, each of those facing a particular part of the elephant, and describing this part, according to its sensation, its feelings, their feelings, but nobody can, actually describe the elephant in the room as a complex phenomena. And that's a very important, I think, problem, or very important flow of the modern regulation of the digital marketplace. As we see in other areas, for instance, of ecological sphere of climate change, in climate agenda, we are seeking a common regulatory framework, a common language to regulate the biological diversity or climate change. And all the countries around the world, they're trying to build kind of a comprehensive, solid perception of the regulatory approach to these changes. And just recent General Assembly of the United Nations or Glasgow Climate Accord showing this incentive coming from a number of countries to find a common ground in regulating this phenomena like climate change and biological development. We need this type of approach in competition law and policy as well. So this kind of common thinking about evolution of digital marketplace, of digital economy, and we call it ecological approach to regulation, and it could be based on a solid foundation of wellspring of knowledge provided by ecology and biology already. And this is a type of harmony which gentlemen, according to Confucius, seek actually. It's not a uniformity. It's rather like based and harmonized approach based on those principles which are already developed by ecologists and biologists all around the world, employing methods of mathematical analysis and different mechanisms. Actually, one of the insights we're taking from traditional Chinese culture, and this very important element of philosophical thinking about nature and about living organisms and living ecosystem, which is called Wuxin. And Wuxin is emphasize cyclical nature of any living organism, of any ecosystem. This cyclical and adaptive nature of any ecosystem leads us to understanding of a cycle of development, which is actually essential part of any business strategy. And it starts with birth and goes to growth, transformation, externalization of effects, and renewal, and a renewal of ecosystem, each and every ecosystem on micro level, like individual organism, or macro level, if we talk about oceans or planet on planetary scale. Each and every organism live in this type of cycle with birth, growth, renewal, and other elements present. And the beauty of this model or this framework through which this lens through which we can look at the ecosystems development and actually adjust ecosystems accordingly, is that we can, it also teaches us how in static form different elements or different phases of the same organism interact, like human body interact. You have different organs, different systems, different functions of the organism interacting with each other in static phase, in static mode, but also in dynamic mode. We have generating cycle of changing ecosystem. That's what actually we learn from traditional medicine or other approach to human body. We're treating human body in this paradigm, in a paradigm of holistic Wussian approach, through both its dynamic cycle, when we see any kind of human body is evolving as a living organism, but also in some sort of static interrelations between different elements, because we simultaneously have interactions between elements of the human organism. That actually leads us to this holistic approach where you treat the whole body as an interconnected, interrelated organism, normally before you see the disease coming. So kind of a preventive medicine which help you to treat the organism before actually you see any kind of negative processes going on. If you take an example of some of the cases in a digital economy, we see this approach is missing right now, but it could be employed and it should be employed in similar manner or similar fashion. Let's take Android case, which was analyzed and investigated by a number of authorities around the world. And we see very different, more like reminding us this tale of, 8 blind, wizards around an elephant, rather than a holistic approach of a Wussian type of practitioner or, doctor. And in Android case, we see intervention by the authorities at different stages of development of these ecosystems. They were very diverse and to a certain extent fragmented. And they did not really focus on the stages of development of this Android ecosystem, neither on a potential outcome of those interventions. And in some instances, we saw they were neglecting or kind of, totally ignoring the living nature of this ecosystem and the cycle which goes into one direction. The cycle you can't be reverted. And in many of the remedies employed by antitrust authorities, actually, authorities were thinking to revert the generating cycle instead of supporting its further development and coming to a next stage through renewal to birth of new business models, new ecosystems, new basically products. So we see a potential of implementing this type of comprehensive Wussian approach, cyclical based nature approach to regulation of ecosystems. Some other insights from Wussian model, from ecological and biological sphere. I think Elena will tell about this more, so I skip this particular slide, and I just finish with some sort of policy statement which could be promoted within eco-antitrust kind of domain or movement, let's call it this way, that authorities have to convert themselves, transform themselves from mechanics who think in industrial fashion about repairing and maintaining mechanisms of the markets, into gardeners and breeders who actually cultivate and breed the new ecosystems and new living organisms in the digital marketplace, which essentially becoming more and more resembling this type of living creature or living organism. So thank you. I end here and pass the floor to Elena with some insights from ecology and biology and use of mathematical models. Thank you very much.
How much time do I have?
Take your time.
All right, so we will start when we get the slides on. Let me try to see if it works. Yes, it does. It's very small. Okay, but yeah, let me start. So in the beginning of my presentation, I also had a few general remarks. They, to some degree, overlap with what Alexey just presented, but perhaps they provide a slightly different angle and hopefully are complementary to what Alexey just said. First, you can't read it, I apologize, so that the font size happens to be too small. On my computer it looks good. But yeah, but I will read you a story and I want you to follow this story. So the story is called Agent in the Complex System. So the story is about an autonomous agent called Agent X. And she is surrounded by and interacting with other similar and less similar agents, all of whom are embedded in a dynamically evolving environment. This agent's survival is determined by how much resources she is able to acquire, as well as by how other agents and the external environment treat her. Our agent has to innovate to maintain her existence, and so do other agents in their own way, with higher or lower success. Agents predate one upon each other to win the competition race. One agent, Agent Y, is already very successful, as she was able to harness the positive feedback loop between growth and access to resources. Agent Y has therefore reached a dominating position in the ecosystem, and many other agents do go extinct as they are not able to compete with Y for access to resources. Another agent, Agent Z, was able to find a niche where she can exist safely and maintain her size at the comfortable level. Agent Z is in symbiotic relationship with another agent, Agent S, as each one of them produces a useful input for the other agent's activity. Eventually, our agent, Agent X, has managed to develop a highly innovative strategy that allows her to grow very fast. She is now on her way to overtake the dominant Agent Y, who in turn got stuck in her inner complexity and is already losing her power in the ecosystem. As a result of these dynamics, the entire ecosystem and the whole environment, indeed, are drastically changing too. Ecosystem agents will soon have to rediscover their roles and positions in the new reality, or they will have to fade away. Now is my question. What is the object of this story? What is the story about? What is Agent X? What is environment? What is it all about? The answer is, this can be both. This can be nature and digital ecosystems. Likewise, in nature, you find agents who innovate, compete, they grow also in size, but they grow in complexity, and eventually, sometimes they lose their dominating position, and sometimes they may go extinct or die out. So the same happens, or similar phenomena happens also in digital platform ecosystems. And that multiple analogies, or that complex of analogies, makes us think that we may indeed transfer some of the notions from natural ecosystems to digital platform ecosystems. Why? Because both types of ecosystems, so both types of systems more broadly, are so-called complex systems. So they consist of multiple autonomous agents. Agents interact with each other, with external environment. Environment is evolving and is being impacted by agents. Also very important is to realize that the boundary between what is a system and what is environment actually are not clearly defined. And that's one of the features of the platform ecosystems, of platformization in general. So system and environment are in fact one thing. And so they are blurred, and it only depends on us as researchers where we want to place those boundaries. And finally, interactions of agents emerge into macro level phenomena. So you can explain by micro level interactions something that happens at the macro level. That's also a typical feature of complex systems. So in late 60s or 70s, 80s, in that period of time, so this kind of complex systems analysis has been developing really rapidly, also at IIASA. And in particular, so this panarchy theory was developed. So panarchy means like a universal sort of rules of how life develops, let's say like that. And what and the Buzz Holling was a figure that very famous scientist that was behind that. So he called it Panarky Cycle. So he observed that many different systems across different domains, natural systems, economic systems, social systems, many different systems, go through very similar life cycle or very similar stages of development. Yeah. You can see it on the slide. So stages include the period of fast growth. So as it's called exploitation and growth, then it's conservation and stabilization, release, and then reorganization. Yeah. So that is similar that we already heard from Alexey, but in this language. So this was really something that complex system theorists developed in, as I said, in the second half of the 20th century. And then when we looked at it in this project earlier this year, so Alexey noticed that indeed that nothing is new under the sun, and we've seen concept that was long ago, much long ago, developed in China. So indeed provides a similar framework. So something that Western science kind of came to, let's say 50 years ago, roughly. So it was already known and was conceptualized already thousands of years ago in China. But I'm not going to discuss that in detail. So you already heard about that from Alexey. So now I go to more substance on the ecology. So this paper was the foundational paper. Again, Alexey referred to it already. So this is by James Moore, 1993. So the paper was Predators and Prey, a New Ecology of Competition. So basically, this James Moore was a business strategist, business analyst. So he was the first who suggested to pay attention to this ecosystem, or business ecosystems, as he called it at that time. And to not just use that as a notion, but really sort of benefit from the knowledge that is already in ecology and benefit, so that businesses could benefit from that. Yeah. And he also noticed these 4 stages, as you can see: birth, expansion, leadership, and self-renewal. So he pointed again that, or not again, but for the first time for business ecosystems, that they undertake, or they go through similar stages as natural systems. But he looked at it really through the perspective of a firm. So he wanted to use this analogies to advise to companies how they should succeed in this new environment. So what kind of elements of the strategies they should use to be more successful than others. So a few papers followed after this seminal paper. And now we suggest that not only for businesses it may be useful to learn from ecology, but also for regulators. Yeah, so that's the next step. So regulators should also learn from nature and benefit from that. So how they could do that? So that slide is the main slide for us so far. Yeah. Oops, no, that's not what I wanted. Sorry. Yeah. So this is the main slide for now. So that slide conceptualize 5 levels of how we can place metaphors between natural ecosystems and digital platform ecosystems. There are 5 levels, or 4 of them are kind of fixed levels, and the 5th level is a moving level. So let me quickly explain that. So at the micro level, in natural ecosystems, we would have genomes. And individual agents, remember my story about agents in the beginning. So in this case, agents would be individual genes, and processes that they would engage in would be processes like mutation, recombination, and so on and so forth. At a similar kind of level for digital ecosystems would be innovation processes within ecosystems. So there, the headline would be human and knowledge capital. And there we talk about individual technologies and elements of business strategy that would be these individual agents. And again, they are mutating. So you can think of a business strategy that is a small mutation of the old one, but that becomes a new, or may become a new successful business strategy, or an individual technology. Again, there can be a small mutation, or maybe not so small, and then you get to a new one. So the analogy, the first level of analogies is at that level. Yeah? Then if we move up to the next level would be meso level, as we call it. In nature, we would see species on that level, and in digital ecosystems, we would see products. So they are resulting from the lower level. So species result from their genetic information from their genomes. Likewise, products result from individual technologies and elements of business strategies. Moving on, let me skip meta level, I come back to it. Moving on to the fourth level would be the macro level. At the macro level, we observe ecosystems in both cases. It's natural ecosystems and digital ecosystems. So they are collections of species or products. Yeah. So again, the lower level gives rise to the higher level in this case. And finally, the highest level, mega level, would be the entire biosphere in case of natural ecosystems, or entire industry or economy in case of digital platform ecosystems. Again, one can see that the lower level, macro level, would go up or would provide input into higher level, which is a mega level. The fifth level here in orange color, we call meta level, and the meta level can be located anywhere between two green levels, because meta level is responsible for interactions. For example, if you look at the micro level, and if we see their individual technologies, they may interact, they may form some kind of symbiotic relationships. For example, you can have a smartphone, and the smartphone is a symbiosis of a few key technologies: internet, this kind of screen that we can touch, chips, microchips that are inside, and so on. So those technologies form so-called symbiotic relationship. They together form something that they cannot achieve alone. So this is an example when sometimes referred to as 1 + 1 + 1 is 100. So they can also be in competition. Different elements of the technologies, likewise, business strategies can also be in competition. Yeah, so I guess you can think yourself of good examples here. So interactions can also be between species. So this was at the micro level. Now, if you go up to meso level, again, interactions you can think of among species, where again there can be symbiotic relationships, competing relationships, and so on. So this meta level that is responsible for interactions can actually apply to each of these levels, as you can see. Developing this concept further, and we don't have time to, I believe, to discuss it, but let me at least display these two slides. So this would be on natural ecosystems, and the next one will be on digital ecosystems. It's important to understand that not only the lower level creates a basis for the higher level, as I already very briefly explained, but also there is a process going from the top down, because the higher level defines what happens at the lower level. The easiest would be to explain it using the mega level. So when we have a mega level and the entire biosphere, of course, it defines conditions for the ecosystems. So what's important in this construction is that the lower level creates a basis for the higher level, but the higher level in turn creates conditions for the lower level. And so they constantly interact in this kind of loops, yeah, that you can see here. And we see it for natural ecosystems, and we see similar types of interactions. And you can really define at every stage, at every level, what are relevant processes to this specific level. Again, we don't have time to discuss it in details, but I hope you get the point. So here, for those who are interested, again, Alexey mentioned this briefly. It's some kind of literature. It's very, very few examples. There is much more. These are examples of authors and papers that have already suggested to use ecological thinking to understand digital ecosystems or business ecosystems more broadly, and also other economic systems that are similar, for example, financial systems. So this literature already exists. What we observe in this literature, it's very useful literature. It gives food for thought. So what we observe, however, is that usually it doesn't go in depth with this analysis. So it gives some kind of hints, or it gives, as I said, food for thought, perhaps, but it doesn't really give, it doesn't operationalize. What does it really mean to apply ecological thinking to, for example, business ecosystems? Yeah, it calls for that, but it doesn't explain what it really means. So that is the research gap that we see, and that's what we are trying to do in this project. So in the next slides, very quickly, I would like to show two examples of this operationalization, how this could be done, this is very much work in progress. This is nothing near, not even final, but not even anything mature. But this is more to show how this could be done. It's not necessarily that what I'm presenting is the right kind of way. Yeah. The first example, let me talk a little bit about the network view, how one can use network analysis, network theory, to understand platform economy. So what is network theory? This is a concept that is called multiplex graphs or multiplex networks. So the concept refers to the situation where you have different elements. As you can see, they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they are the same elements in all 3 levels, but they have different types of links or connections that connect the same elements. So if you think about ecosystems, digital ecosystems, these elements could be, for example, a platform, complementers, and users in the very simple case. And the links can be financial links, but it's also flows of data. It's also flows of information and power. So you can think of different links located or different connections located at different levels, and all these levels are important, and all together they form the digital ecosystem. And this is similar to natural ecosystems where you observe, for example, species, and species are connected also by multiple flows. They are connected by flows of energy and different chemical elements such as nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, and so on. Very similar kind of construction. For simplicity and for the sake of this presentation, we could follow, or we could focus, for example, on financial flows. Financial flows are, of course, fundamental. So if we now, for a while, forget about these multiple layers and only look at one layer, yeah, only at financial layer, and let's look at a very simple model that one can think about. So you can think of an economy that consists of 5 major actors. This would be platform or platforms, many. This would be citizens, rest of the economy, so everything else that is not platform, financial institutions, and public budget. It's very simplistic, of course, but already in this system, you can see how many different links, so all these arrows indicate different financial flows that one observes in this system. Already here, you see quite some complexity. What's also important to notice that there is always an external link. So the link that comes from outside of the system, in this case, for simplicity, let's assume that it's only financial institutions that receive money from outside. In reality, this can be more complex, but let's look at it like that. So what we see that this system resembles, of course, an ecosystem again. So where you have different species, in this case, there is a very simple ecosystem depicted on the right-hand side, where you can have plants, you can have insects, you can have different members of these ecosystems. And here I want to discuss how to use one theory. It's one of many, many other theories, but to present you an example. And the theory has to do with so-called trophic levels. So in ecosystems and natural ecosystems, it's important to understand and analyze which trophic structure, and trophic structure is defined by trophic levels, which trophic structure this system exhibits. What is the trophic structure? So the trophic or trophic level. Trophic level defines how close is an element of the system to the source of energy, to the primary source of energy. In case of financial systems or ecosystems, this would be source of money. So in this case, for example, in our case, financial institutions are directly receiving financial flows from outside. So they would be closest to the source of, to the external source of, in this case, money. In case of natural systems, for example, this would be vegetation. Vegetation directly receives energy from the sun. So this is the sunlight. So they would also be at the lowest trophic level. So the lowest trophic level is a direct, is the level that has direct access to the resource. And then the ecosystem builds up. So the higher is the element of the ecosystem, the further it is away from the energy source or from the financial source, from the resource source. So we can try to use this theory, trophic level theory from ecology, and try to see what does it tell us about platform system. So if you do that, and if you use that theory, so we can compute so-called trophic levels. And again, I'm sorry for very small font size. Somehow on my computer it looks bigger. but I will tell you what it depicts. So we compute trophic levels, and trophic levels again are numbers. So it's one single number. And it tells you so the number itself doesn't matter so much, but the comparison of numbers matters. So the number that is lower is the one that, as I said, indicates that this element is closest to the primary resource. And the number that is higher means that it's further away. So in this case, in this system, for example, its citizens happen to be those who are the furthest away from the resource. So this already tells you immediately the role of citizens in this example. Yeah, in another example can be different, but this particular example is like that. And so you can immediately see how this theory could be used to diagnose different systems. You can calculate these trophic levels and then say, these actors are closer to the primary resource. And that, of course, makes them more powerful, because then they can receive that resource, they can rely on that resource. Yeah, if you are far away from the resource, maybe the resource reaches you, maybe not. So that becomes uncertain. So in principle, in terms of stability and in terms of survival, especially in natural systems, you would rather want to be at the lower level, because there you get your resource from that perspective. Yeah, there are other perspectives, of course. So for example, this one, and this, of course, I can only compute, or in this case, I computed it for 5 elements, but you can imagine a system of 1 million agents. And you can do the same calculations. It's just for this illustration. So you can consider very complex system and compute these trophic levels in this complex system, where you have no idea what role every element plays. And by computing that can give you a hint how this element is located with respect to the primary resource. What else can we do? So we can compare, for example, a system with and without platforms. So what do the platforms do? So they do many things, but one thing from financial perspective, what they do, they redivert financial flows. As we know, one of the problems of the platformization now is that they receive a lot of investment. So the financial flows are going through the platforms. So if we compare the same system with and without the platform, so what do we see? We see that the trophic levels in the system without the platform go down. This means that the platform adds additional cycles or additional complexity to the system, and that makes that system, or that makes the other agents in that system be further away from the primary resource. So platform makes them or moves them away from the primary resource, one may say. Moreover, what we know from ecology is that complex systems with higher trophic levels tend to be less stable altogether as a system. So more complex structures, and that's a very complex issue, and it's not so simple as I'm now saying, but for the simplicity of this presentation, let me say it like that, more complex trophic systems, as I said, tend to be less stable. And that, again, something that we can now estimate or assess using these trophic levels. So the higher trophic levels we observe, the less stability we can expect in that system if we apply the same logic as we apply in ecology. So this was one example. And then the second example would be the example where we look at competition. Here, again, there is a lot of theory that has been developed in ecology for more than 100 years already, a lot of models, a lot of understanding how species or other elements of the ecosystems, but let me talk about species for now, how they compete. So again, if I start for the sake of this presentation, this very simple model, a simple model would have, for example, 2 predators, P1 and P2, and 1 resource. So both P1 and P2 consume the same resource. So in nature, that would be 2 predators, for example, and this could be 1 prey. Yeah, you can think of a tiger and a lion, and they compete for some smaller animals, yeah, for instance. So in economics or in economic systems, so that would be, for example, 2 platforms. And let's imagine that platform 1 is an incumbent platform. So it already is in the system, it's successful, it's present, it's there. And then a rivalry platform that wants to compete, P2, that wants to compete with P1. And let's say that U is a common resource. And what is the resource? Yeah, so we all heard about the market, the market of attention of our, or market of our time, right? So the platforms compete actually for our time, for time of users that they spend on the platform, or even to be more precise, for their willingness to spend time. So if we apply this biological or ecological theory, so what can we have? So we can again have some kind of simulation, and in the simulation we can see in this example that how can P2 overtake P1? For that, P2 of course has to behave more aggressively. So it's a more aggressive strategy in terms of consuming the resource. So remember, so we had this, both of them consume the resource. So as soon as P2 is more aggressive than P1, of course, P2 will overtake P1. And if you now imagine that there is P3, P4, P5, and so on, so everyone who is more aggressive would, of course, overcompete. So this race for aggressiveness in principle never ends. In biology, it, however, ends. And it ends because of other mechanisms. For example, if one species spends too much time or too much effort on competition, they engage less in reproduction. They lose their reproduction possibilities. And they will die out for another reason, yeah, for that reason. So they may compete with their competitors successfully, but they still die out. So, but that already requires more complex models, but it kind of seems also applicable to economic systems likewise, but that would be more complex. Let me show you a simpler model. So this model, as I said, P1, because he is less aggressive, so he dies out. You can see the green line going down. And red and blue line, so blue is P2, so this one is winning this competition, and U, so the red line is the resource. Yeah, so you see this kind of cyclical behavior again. Alexey already mentioned this. These are these business cycles that biological models also exhibit. So we don't have too much time to discuss it. Let me skip that. This is interesting. So this is this so-called Intra-Guild predation strategy that can help P1 to compete with P2, even if he doesn't want or chooses not to be so aggressive. So on the previous slide, we saw that, or it seemed like the only way to compete or the only way to win is to be more aggressive. But actually, that's not the only way. The other way is to apply so-called intra-guild competition strategy. And that means that P1 itself can consume P2. And that we observe in nature. So there are many examples when this happens in nature. And likewise, we also observe this in case of digital ecosystems, and that is referred to as killer acquisition strategy. By doing that, P1 obviously weakens P2. So P2 is still aggressive. He consumes a lot of resource from you, but P2 itself becomes more weak. And by that, the P1 can win the competition. Again, one can do different simulations here. In particular here, we analyze two different situations. You can have either acquisition or a pure, what we call purely predatory practice or killer acquisition. So in nature, that corresponds to two different cases. So P1 can consume P2, that would be acquisition, or just kill P2 and not consume it. Yeah, so you can kill and consume, or kill and not consume. And so that would also be, so both phenomena we can see in nature, and both phenomena we also can see in digital economy. I will not discuss the details of these plots, but you can look this up. Important to understand is, or notice that in this case, the blue line now goes down. So P2, remember he was successful in the first plot, but now P2 actually goes down and P1 happily continues to exist and consume the resource. I think this is the last slide with some other interesting insights that we also noticed for the same model. So we can compare with and without this acquisition, what I was talking about before. Like you can either, as a predator, you can either consume this other predator or just kill. Yeah. And what we observe here is that in both cases, on the previous slide, you could see, so in both cases, this is a successful strategy to overtake P2. But what's the difference? The difference is the frequency and the depth of this cyclical dynamic. And what we observe here is, let us see, that without acquisition, you have more frequent and deeper cycles than with the acquisition. So what interpretation this may have? So the slower parts, the plot depicts the amount of resource, so U, that was on the previous slide, that is being consumed. Yeah, so when this plot goes to the lower part of the curve, this means little resource is consumed. When it goes up, that means a lot of resource is consumed. So when little resource is consumed, that means that people spend less time on the platform, less attention, less time. This allows them to actually escape the platform. So if we are not so engaged with the platform, it's much easier to escape that platform rather than if we spend all our time, our whole life, we don't sleep, we don't eat, we spend it on the platform. So this peaks, this low peaks of the curve is an opportunity in a sense for platforms to redesign themselves or for users to redefine their interests. So they can decide to lose the platform because they are not so attached to it. And so what we see here is that this difference between this accusation and accusation and without that actually changes those opportunities. Yeah. So for example, in this case, without accusation allows a higher chance for users to leave the platform because we have lower peaks on the curve. I hope you can follow this logic. It's a little bit complex. Okay, so this is just an example again, and I repeat, so this is very much work in progress, or rather even in the beginning of it. So for now, the purpose to present this was to give you a sense and to give you a feel of what kind of models are out there. And I emphasize again that this is a very simple model. There are many much more complex models that, of course, can produce much richer results. So this is really for illustration and to just sort of open up a few possibilities and see what kind of metaphors, what kind of analogies can be borrowed from ecology for to be used for analyzing digital ecosystems. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Elena. I think we turn to those colleagues who were not with us in this working group before. Maybe Yanis, you can start, or Elena, or sorry, Svetlana, you can start. Who would? Yeah, sometimes, not always. Yeah, but is it new material for you, or you've heard it? Okay, so maybe we start with Svetlana and then turn to you.
Yes, it would be difficult for me because I'm completely unprepared, but I'll try to share my minds with you. Please stop me. Please stop if I will be too long because actually I have a lot of suggestions for your project, but let me start with a few general comments. And my first comment is about eco-antitrust. I understand that eco-antitrust reminds two important things, and these are ecosystems and ecology. For ecosystems, of course, 100% of audience would support you. For ecology, you should expect more discussion, I would say, and more critique. But let us first remind why the idea of renewal of traditional competition policy or traditional approach to competition policy arises. It's because of the inability of traditional competition policy or traditional antitrust enforcement to cope with the competition concerns Yes, which appear because of digital platforms. And strictly speaking, again, about half of the audience would support you in this thesis. But what would be the problem? Which problem your approach would create for economists as academic economists and economists as regulator? I think for economists as regulators, for the authorities, actually your idea would be acceptable. Why? Because in fact, something like eco-antitrust takes place. It takes place already, because what does it mean, eco-antitrust? Just I tried to fix something. It means first discretion versus procedure, something like procedural certainty. It means interventions instead of following predetermined rules or enforcement following predetermined rules. It means something like experiments versus traditional or formalistic law enforcement. And I would say at that point, everyone again would support you, because economists support the idea that under creative destruction that we observe, traditional legal rules are just unable to take into account new challenges and new problems. Like again, let me remind from the history, law on guilds was completely unable to cope anything which emerged during industrialization, because it's just for another economy, another organization, and it's clear for economists, as academic economists, your approach would be problematic. Why? Because actually you ask from economists to give up the model of a market. For economists, traditionally, antitrust enforcement is based on the model of a market, of a monopoly on a market, or oligopoly, or strategic interaction on a market. But everything is concentrated on a market. Evidence is collected about the market. Evidence-based approach is the evidence-based approach that derived from the information collected from the market. You ask for economists to give up the market and to give up a firm and to concentrate on ecosystems. Again, 100% economists would support you that ecosystems are important. But the problem is that economists, for me, don't know how to do research on ecosystems. In fact, a lot. Yanis, I'm very sorry. It's not about your paper. I understand you are able, but most. I mean, typical economists. Typical economists can say very little about ecosystem. The ecosystem is a complex of companies which interact and create value together. Full stop. That's it. How to evaluate? We know how to evaluate the firm capitalization, blah blah blah, market share, blah blah blah. Here you monopoly, profit maximization, profit maximizing prices, strategy. We know very little about the instruments to analyze ecosystems, I would say. And right now, economists are very active in borrowing the approaches to analyze ecosystems from other fields, from other academic fields like sociology, for instance, and in your In your example, it's maths. And it's not strange, I would say, because most economists in the USSR and most economists now who are older than 60 years old prepare their PhD in the system in the Institute of System Analysis. So system analysis is a very traditional for Russian economists. And again, from this part would be supported. What kind of critique I would expect to your approach? Please present an evidence that your approach explain platforms economy and ecosystems performance better than traditional economic models. That's it, because your first example, just your first example, higher profitability makes the system less stable. Okay, but it's very traditional for economists. Higher profitabilities attract potential entrants. Blah blah blah. The same result, the same outcome. Why your approach is better? It might be better, but you should convince why. Why exactly? Your second approach reminds me something like attention oligopoly model by Tommaso Valetti, very much similar. Again, your approach about your example about to be more tough or weak reminds a lot classical classification of Jean Tirole by strategies of preventing entry. Sometimes it's better to be tough. Sometimes it's better to be weak, depending on which are your strategic variables at the second stage of the game. In fact, I'm very enthusiastic just because your predictions, yes, sorry, your predictions are very close in some sense to the predictions of traditional economic and well-accepted economic models. It's in fact for me it's not a problem. In some sense, it's a promise. It's a promise, but again, I would suggest to apply your approach to ecosystems and platforms, particular ecosystems and particular platforms. For instance, this trophic analysis. Why don't you apply it for Facebook? Might be very interesting. If you provide the readers, the audience, with the examples that you can derive the implications, not about ecology systems, but about real world platforms, I think it would increase the desire of the audience to support your ideas at the end. So I'm very sorry for a long comments. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Svetlana. Would you, shall we, or Yanni, maybe you want to intervene? Yeah, please.
Can share a few thoughts.
Please.
I mean, well, I mean, it was very interesting. I think it comes into the tradition of the Moore approach, taking a little bit his ecology analogy to the more extreme level, I would say, than originally. So I think it's definitely a very worthy avenue for further research. And of course, you know, as Svetlana was saying, we're in a period where we are facing the difficulties, challenges with the existing models and tools, and we are in more openness to other ways of thinking. And I think definitely this is a period to do this type of more prospective research. A few comments, but of course I'll be interested to think a bit more because that's a few minutes. First I would say, what is important, I think, is to have in mind exactly what is the purpose of the analysis. If it is to just develop the ecological analogy, I think it might be an interesting venture, but in the context of the legal framework, because I obviously know more about that, it's interesting to understand what exactly is going to be the added value of that analogy. Generally, the literature about ecosystems in the business strategy literature was about a theory of intervention, the intervention of the orchestrator. So this is why, I use the term orchestrator. It has been called differently by others, but it's basically this idea of an actor or mega actor who is actually, putting in place different units of analysis, other units of analysis, create complementarities, and make a value proposition, okay? So it was very much of an interventionist perspective. It wasn't really a static ecological thing that was organically developing. It was basically, the whole idea was that there was some form of agency by a player, the orchestrator, who actually was taking advantage of the existing, I will call it ecological, whatever, environment, right? Some of it was by agents, and I will come to that in a moment. Some of that wasn't agents, okay, could not be qualified as agents, and therefore, was somehow creating a value proposition. And the whole idea was about that. This idea of design, basically. Huh? Now, in law, we have the same type of question. We have public authorities that are facing the social impact of the development of these various new forms of production, and there's actually a quest about a theory of intervention for these public authorities, and that's why I think a lot of the discussions have been a little bit about the limits of private governance of these ecosystems and the need for introducing a little bit of a public actor who can also be conceptualized as part of the ecosystem, of the ecology. But in any way, this is the idea. What is this public actor going to do? And there, there has been a lot of discussion about, some people say, like Annabel Gaver, for instance, in a paper that is also available on the special issue we co-edited with Marco at the Industrial Corporate Journal, which is about, let's have self-regulation, or you can actually go to different types of between soft and hard law. It could take standards, principles, rules, and then you can take all the various dimensions of that. But again, so in a certain way, this institutional ecology is something that is now, a matter of discussion. So now that brings me to the second issue. So the first is theory of intervention. What theory of intervention do you have? Is it really something that you take into account, or is it more of kind of organic development of a garden that, flourishes without any specific intervention? And the question is what exactly we mean by intervention also. I think it's an interesting question. So the second issue is about, what are your agents? Who is an agent in your ecology? In sociology, for instance, there has been a lot of discussion about, agents are usually considered as, humans, or at least organisms, institutions. But there's another school in sociology, the actor network theory, where basically agents can be also things. So, so the question is, how you can develop basically, a system where you have various types of agents. Or is it going to be like just agents with volition, and the other things? I don't know. So are you really like into the methodological? Are you still keeping methodological individualism, or are you actually moving to methodological particularism? a question that has been asked already to actor network theory, because it shows basically to, to have a much more open perspective on who is an agent, but, same question can apply in your case. Now, in terms of unit of analysis, I think, we all agree that most of the times economists have been focusing on markets. I mean, as Svetlana was saying, but actually you have an economic school which has been focusing on the firms. I mean, and this is, I would say, the cause kind of paradigm. So, and now, we have this new kind of organisms, I can call it this way, ecosystems that develop, which are basically very much based on complementarities. So in a way, it's part of the firms family. I mean, if we can, I think it's much closer to institutional economics from that perspective, because they're actually not looking to the market, but they're looking to develop basically a theory about complementarities and co-production, but which looks a little bit more to governance aspects, I would guess. But again, that's something that we all agree. We see that emerging. We try to understand, this to create these new concepts like ecosystem to deal with that and describe it, which I think is great. However, that's nice in terms of description, but after you describe something and you agree that, oh, this is something different than what we knew already, I mean, markets and firms, and maybe you ask the question, should we apply the things we develop for markets to this, or should we, adopt something else? Then, I think it's an interesting question about what you do and what is the added value of the ecological antitrust analogy. Now, what I thought very interesting was this focus on, and this is why also you use a lot, because obviously you have been referring to simulation, etc. It's basically a little bit about this foresight issue. And Alexey used this very nice analogy about a gardener. I mean, that we need to be gardeners. And I think that was very interesting from a public authority perspective. And it reminded me a little bit, actually, maybe I'm, the Greek Competition Authority is already a gardener, because we have been the first to put forward this idea of using the sandbox in order to develop basically, new ecosystems and somehow be at the design table of these, business plans and projects that are brought to us, to our attention. So, in a way, it, and this very is very close to something I've been working with, with Timo Minsen, I mean, Copenhagen, I've been about a different way for the competition authorities to act in the future. I mean, not just reactively about basically, enforcing the law, etc., but also very proactively by being designers of competitive ecosystems and using tools like the sandbox model, for instance. I mean, that's one of the examples to put forward different avenues in a way. But again, the question there is, they will going to do this under some kind of theory of intervention, because otherwise it will be, whatever I think, it could be a little bit arbitrary to a certain extent. So we need to have at least, when we are doing this type of role, some form of, theory of intervention, or basically a principle or something, and much more operationalized concepts. And I think that's maybe a question, but I think definitely, this is the mood. I mean, we're trying to do that and to be a little bit more symbiotic with our environment and help it develop in more competitive ways, competition being a principle that we have in mind. So what else? I really like the trophic levels analogy. It's another way to assess maybe power to a certain extent. I mean, in our work with Bruno Cabala, we have been using between centrality in networks. I mean, trophic levels can be an interesting other way. Of course, you need to identify what is the energy in this context. I mean, is it money? Is it something else? Is it attention? Is it, I mean, and of course, this is not an innocent question, because depending on the definition of what is, the energy, and you take into account, you arrive to different results, which is not something that we face in the way we actually determined the power in this context. calculate the metrics of power. So, I mean, these are some of the remarks. I had some other stuff as well, but maybe we'll leave some time for further discussion and comments. But I think, you know, this is interesting. It's, you know, it should be done, I think. And it might lead to very, very insightful kind of work. So, yeah.
Thank you, Yanis, very much. And probably we can open up discussion to those who wanted to intervene, maybe Kai or Joan, you wanted to say something, or Nicola. Everyone, please raise your hand, and yeah, when you feel ready or feel like, please go ahead. Sorry, anyone? Or yeah, Joan, please go ahead. Yeah, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself because we can't hear you.
Yes. Okay. So I enjoy both two presentations and the two comments very much. I learned a great deal. And so my basic concern is the same as the two colleagues who make comments that so what will be the main purpose of this study? So I'm thinking, like, for example, if we use the concrete example we discussed in previous times, like interoperability, and whether or not this can be an example of this ecological cohabitation or something, that could be maybe one step further. But at the more theoretical level, I would suggest maybe we should look at some evolutionary game theory, because as you know, there are some methodological debate about the theory of evolution and the theory of the games before. I mean, because some people are saying that theory of evolution is only about a local maximum, but the theory of games actually has a more ambitious, is more about a global optimal. But later there's some effort to develop this evolutionary game theory. I mean, I think this try to reconcile the potential conflict between agency and and this natural selection. So that would be my maybe most general theoretical comments. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, John, very much. And yeah, I agree that the purpose is a bit broad right now. It's defined like a new methodology, a new approach. And I agree that we have to overcome a number of obstacles in kind of developing it. But because we show it as a, you know, as a kind of new movement, I would say, yeah, we frame it as a new movement, new kind of way of thinking. So probably there could be sub-projects related to particular topics or areas where there would be more operationalized purpose. Let's say when we develop a concept of, you know, trophic theories to discuss, let's say, as Yanis suggested, like power, that's one thing, it could go one direction. Another story could be through usage of, you know, the model of predator-prey, you know, developed a more complex model of predator-prey, this Lotka-Valtera model, to describe different regulatory ways to kind of balance in inter-guild predation and all forms of predation which are divert from classical simple model, and that could be another objective. So there could be a set of purposes. I don't think we have one single purpose, like to rediscover whatever the way antitrust works, but number of purposes more like related to particular avenues we choose. But in principle, like overarching purpose, I think it's to bring antitrust closer to realities of the flexible, living, you know, constantly changing, adaptive digital economy, which is, I think, and it's pretty much consensus if I can say that the modern antitrust is kind of not capable to grasp completely. So, I mean, not completely, but even to a large extent. And that's why actually in a number of jurisdictions, we see these new forms of regulations on the rise, a lot of discussions that antitrust is irrelevant. There should be different, regimes introduced, one for data, one for, I don't know, consumer relations, another for labor relations, one for, I don't know, internal algorithm production, blah, blah, blah. And all these new avenues of regulatory interventions, they very different from antitrust methodology. So we're kind of losing antitrust in this. And so basically, if we can define this main purpose of the project is kind of to save antitrust, to give it a new kind of life, to re-energize it again, yeah, to make it great again, as was commonly phrased by some American politicians. Okay, so thank you very much. And shall we, anyone else, comments, suggestions, reactions, criticism? Oh, Kai, please go ahead. Yes. And yeah, Kai first, Nicola, please.
Okay. Okay, Nicola, you do first, or I can follow you.
No, you were first. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'm first. So thank you. It's my so last time I present your PPT, I missed it. So but today I learned, I reviewed it, and I one question or one suggestion I have is, it might be. So how can we think of the factors? How can we think of the factors which will affect the whole ecosystem? For example, so from the framework, we have the 5 levels from micro level to the macro level, or inside there are meso or middle level. But and this is the structure, and also from the perspective from the framework of Wuxing, it's also the structure. But one thing is that I'm thinking of how can the question I propose, the starting point of my question is, for example, if I want to embed or if I want to include technology solutions or technology innovations into this framework, how can I analyze these factors? How can I analyze these impacts of this technological factors to the framework or to the ecosystem? For example, we discussed the solid or the solid solutions, or we discussed the artificial intelligence, the algorithms. All of these technology innovations will empower or the platforms, or it might not be the empowered platforms, will change the power structure of the ecosystem of the framework. So technology is one thing, and institution is another thing. So all of these things, how can these factors be embedded or be included into this ecosystem? We can consider them as an environment, but how? What are the components of this environment, and how these components will involve? I think it. I don't know whether it's important, but I think if we want to discuss or we want to find the solutions to the antitrust dilemma, or want to the antitrust problems of the platforms, we still need to consider, besides the structure, besides the relationships of different agents, how the environment itself will change or will evolve. It's also another problem, and the agents and the environment interact with each other. Then it comes to the conclusions, or it comes to the results that we have to confront today. So to be concluded, my suggestion or my consideration is how the environment is, whether we need to develop a similar model to illustrate how the environment itself will change or will evolve, and especially the components of the environment, or including the technology and the institutions or other things. So that's my also my question, and following the presentations. So thank you, Alexey, and thank you all.
Oh, thank you, Kai. Maybe I will start and then ask Lena to elaborate. Nicola wanted. Okay, so shall we collect first, and I don't know. Shall we? Yeah, Nicola. Kai, don't you mind if Nicola first, and then we answer?
Yeah. Okay. That's all right.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll be very brief. So, because I already participated in this discussion quite a lot, I just want to maybe highlight. I think that we are, as a part of this project, trying to fill a gap that is evident. I think in the fact that we are too narrowly focused when we look at antitrust harm. So first, because we focus on the individual conduct as opposed to a pattern of conducts. And this is especially relevant when it comes to acquisitions. You don't consider appropriately all the number of acquisitions that are done all together. They can have a much stronger impact on the market than the single individual acquisition that you are examining. Another issue that we do is we focus on the individual companies as opposed to network, and how does the collaboration with others play out, in particular in those situations where the joint action by these actors is what gives rise or increases the extent of the harm. And so here the point that was raised at the beginning by Alexey is that we have much more reliance on agile business structures. So as opposed to vertical integration, we have a series of outsourcing, contracting, and non-specialization by the firms who are offering themselves as infrastructure, where a lot of complementary activities can take place. So the collaboration between the infrastructure and these third parties is quite crucial. And so far, mainly we focus on the individual level, whereas you can think about also joint action as some sort of collective dominance, abuse of collective dominance. But still, antitrust is very limited in applying that kind of theory. So maybe there should be something that allows us to understand also the kind of control that can be exerted today through the leveraging of modular architecture. So you don't need to have hierarchy, you don't need to have vertical integration, you can control a vast number of actors just by leveraging your technology, your algorithms, or access to essential data or inputs. And the third thing which comes from the other two that I mentioned above is also that we focus too much on the market, and this is a concept that we already discussed, but basically we are missing the entire ecosystem of players that is impacted somehow by the operation of these firms, and which even if we combine all the markets that they are participating in, there are some players, there are some inputs, there are some stakeholders which might not receive adequate treatment. And so I think that we are arguing, as it was already pointed out by some, for a new type of intervention, which is not the traditional type of antitrust liability, but it's about understanding the role of ecosystem orchestrators in a sense that tries to make them accountable for conducts that can substantially control or influence. And so I think that this ties to a set of cases that are outside of antitrust that lead to the doctrine of respondeat superior. So whoever is in the position to control some kind of activity that can generate potential harm should be given a stronger responsibility to design the system in a way, and to allow the regulator to intervene like a gardener to make sure that the system operates in a way that is aligned with public values. And here, I mean, I think that what this project is envisaging is a way of designing regulation that taking into account the stage of development of these ecosystems. And this, I think, is where we still have a lot of open questions, because indeed, first of all, we sort of take for granted the way in which innovation works in these ecosystems. So we don't do a close analysis of the empirics that would lead to potential deterioration of the ecosystem, but so that we have to be ready to receive that kind of attack that maybe this can be perceived as paternalistic. We are trying to move on and just think, what are the appropriate type of interventions at different level of development. And I think that maybe this has an implication that at the early stage of the ecosystem, you have to be more welcoming with, for example, exclusive deals, discrimination, preferential treatment, because they allow the system to grow. But at the same time, the moment in which this ecosystem and the ecosystem orchestrator has gained significant scale and power in whatever way we want to define it, then we have to be more careful and more constraining towards the actions of the ecosystem orchestrator. So I think that the big question that needs to be answered is, in a way, what was already mentioned. So how do we define that power? There are multiple ways. I think that Ioannis has done some great work in pointing out where this power might lie, but we are at the beginning of this journey, and we mentioned here financial flows, the flows of data and attention, which are all important. But I think that there are also issues with the share that these players can have in the technological stack. So it's about the ownership of technology, including through property and human capital that can be redeployed across several components of the ecosystem. And well, there would be much more to say, and I think it's a long discussion, but I think, yes, the sandbox is a fantastic way to kind of think about the correct design for this ecosystem. But what we need in order to have a good gardener is also some guiding principle, basically some value that can be used to decide how to do this redistribution. Because in a way, we're talking about a redistribution antitrust, which not everybody accepts that is a value that should inform antitrust action. And there are different ways of doing this. So I think that we need to give a lightning rod to this gardener and say, maybe this is a principle that can be followed. Indeed, as you said, at the higher trophic level, we should be more interventionist to give power at the more towards the lower level. So maybe giving more power in the hand of components, manufacturer, as well as users. But I think that's, intuitively we see that there is some value in designing the intervention this way, but we need to also explain exactly how we would calibrate this in different sets of ecosystems, different types of developments of the ecosystem. So I think that's a lot of questions open for us and potential for future research.
Thank you very much, Nicola. And yeah, thanks a lot. Before we kind of addressing this all questions raised by you and Kai, maybe somebody else wants to intervene. Any hands raised? No. So maybe, sure, please go.
Just to say something. I mean, the question about redistribution that was mentioned. I think we need to be extremely careful here. I've done quite a lot of work on equity and competition. So we have been the first with Damien Gerard to basically publish a book on this. a few years ago, and I've done quite subsequent work on that after. Why I'm saying that, because I just received a few minutes ago an email by Martin Peter Schinkel sending me his paper on distributive justice by antitrust, the Robin Hood cartel, and which I think misrepresents completely some of the writings of the people that have been doing work on equity and fairness and competition law. We don't really say, I mean, at least speaking for me, because I don't know, others might think that, but we never say that we have to authorize market power, which will lead to a redistribution of revenue, or under the condition that the extra revenue, the surplus that will generate, will be distributed to the poor. No one has ever basically, that I know, at least the people have been working with, is saying this. I mean, there's a paper that actually mentions that, as far as I understand it, by Dina Vaked, but that's a different perspective. My perspective has always been that, it's to bring in, so it's not about redistribution. It's basically about ensuring that we have an important analysis of the equity implications of our actions and what actually is happening in the economy. And then, this is why actually I referred a lot to the concept of structural inequality and complex equality, is the fact that you need to take this broader perspective and look to these various spheres of justice that the literature has been talking about, in particular in philosophy. Okay, and I refer to work in this area. So I think we need to be extremely careful when we try to put, forward this idea, what is there for redistribution. That's not the job of antitrust to redistribute. So it's something that we need to be aware of, but it's not the instrument to redistribute. Okay, but and the analysis that I have been doing in this paper on social regulation, and saying that the tax analogy is wrong, because it was basically criticism to traditional economists that were basically, assuming that there was compensation or even hypothetical compensation, and they were not taking into account these equity concerns. Okay, and it was a criticism to that, basically saying that this is going to be taken by tax. And I was basically criticizing that. It's not to say that antitrust should do this. So because Nicola mentioned distribution at one point, so I wanted to make that clear. I just had this email a few minutes ago, and I was looking to the paper, and that's why I had to. So I don't think it's part of. I don't know. Is it part of the ecological antitrust research program? This redistribution? I'm not. I don't know. Did not understand that actually, at least from what you discussed. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I first try to address this point, and then maybe we can. Yeah, I'm not sure that we at any point considered this function, a redistribution of wealth, as a function of antitrust. I kind of aware that this discussion, I mean, maybe not in high details, in large details, sorry, how to say, in details, but in principle, yeah, we never implied this as a function. But I think when you a diligent gardener, you have to be, as you basically said, aware that market power does lead to some form of distribution of wealth, and maybe. And here I also refer to the question raised by Kai. You have to think about environment in which you operate when you deal with particular firm or market, because market as a concept is often very narrowly defined. And sometimes when intervention happens in particular market, actually doesn't lead to any form of, better outcome in terms of functioning of the economy or industry, or kind of broader social context in anyone you can mention or consider. And that's why environment is a very important parameter of eco-antitrust, I think, thinking, if we talk about new thinking or a form of adjusted thinking. So I think environmental element, because ecosystems, they exist on different levels, and there is a scale. When you deal with any ecosystem in nature, in ecology, in biology, you analyze it from different angles, and you have a kind of zooming in and out exercise. So you can go down and deep into like ecosystem of one, I don't know, bees herd or like herd, yeah, of bees, and then you go further up and elevate to the level of, I don't know, field or forest where they live, and then probably it could be a region. And everywhere at each stage, you kind of consider similar relations, links, and agents, as Elena has shown, but at the same time, you operate with different subjects and objects of your regulation. And here, when you consider this environmental impact of either market power or your intervention, or ideally both, so because here what we have, businesses, they very much trained in absorbing some form of externalities of their operations. So that's basically what they're good at. So let's say Facebook utilize a lot consumer behavior, monetize consumer behavior, and basically free ride on consumer labor. So that's what they achieved as a kind of modus operandi for Facebook or other this type of businesses. They free ride a lot on others' involvement. Regulators sometimes, when they structure their intervention, they kind of neglect this element because they too much focused on formal relations, contractual, corporate, other forms of pretty much established economic relations. And they miss this point when they use this relatively artificial notions of market and, you know, firm, or, I mean, artificial in a sense, you have to cut quite severely different elements which not fitting this model, yeah? And when you're doing this exercise, you're already kind of moving yourself, detaching yourself from reality, yeah? And when you include this environmental parameter and you start thinking ecologically, so you have to consider all these weak links and things, and then an aspect of distribution, redistribution comes up as a factor you have to measure, because it becomes environmental impact in a sense. And that's, I think, a very, I mean, at least to me, it sounds like a very appealing thing to kind of add on or additional value which we can bring with an eco-antitrust, because then you become aware of environmental impact, means you're aware of the redistribution happening in the economy because of centrally positioned firms or whatever market power you can say you can attach to them in this particular context, because they do have it. It helps them to benefit massively, which is not included in the equation by industrially driven authorities. So authorities kind of, you know, and I think just we can benefit out of eco-antitrust thinking or ecological thinking while bringing this environmental parameter, which would gives us more power over controlling redistributory function of market power, and maybe intervention would help to more evenly, fairly distribute resources within economy, because it can help to structure the market in a way as ecosystem. Well-functioning ecosystem is an ecosystem where flow of energy goes, well. So if you have deterred, flow of energy, whether it's nutrients or whatever, like carbon or oxygen, so you can say it's not functioning well because somewhere energy, stopped, it's deterred, and you have a blockage. So blockage is an evil of ecosystem. Yeah, if you have a blockage, you kind of ecosystem starts, degrading, and redistribution.
That assumes that ecology works for the best of human interests. I mean, that's not the case. I mean, why should blocking energy be a bad thing? I mean, blocking the water, for instance, by creating a barrier might generate energy. I mean, what I'm saying is, yeah, I understand what you want to say, but it's in terms of deciding what is right or wrong. I mean, just having a naturalist perspective of, things go as they go. I mean, I don't think it's is an assumption that we can support, because I mean, all our existence as humans have been we have been basically struggling against nature. I mean, to a certain extent. I mean, I understand. I mean, I just trying to be an agent provocateur now.
I see it, and no worries. I mean, that's basically what we are here, and I can actually respond to this point. I agree that human civilization was for years, for centuries, based on kind of it's a fight with nature. Yeah, there are a lot of like things which we used to do against nature, and now kind of regretting about. And even these blockades, these dams, and blocking the rivers, we see how detrimental effect it has on ecosystems of those rivers. Volga River is dead, for instance. Yeah, now just because of this dams we destroyed. And here you kind of compare value for the human population living there, like electricity generation, and value for ecosystems. So for ecosystems, blockade was very negative for ecosystem of the river, which was not included industrial development of towns surrounding the river. But for ecosystem of the river, it was very detrimental. So let's say we're not saying that antitrust and digital economy in principle should be like pro-nature in a sense. Everything which benefits natural development would be like prioritized against what not. But we say that create such values as sustainability, and here we refer to basically basic principles of modern discourse, about sustainability of economy, of nature, and so on. They should be included within antitrust. So we kind of say, yes, digital economy is ecosystem of its own. And if we consider it to be sustainable and it's valuable, because sustainability was not a value back in, I don't know, 50s or 30s. In 30s, they were thinking only about growth, industrialization, more steel, more coal.
I think I understand it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the idea of resilience, etc., I think is very important. And I think, that maybe, you can have a normative perspective. I mean, it's not just description, you can actually have a normative perspective as well in your work, like this is a way, for instance, to better integrate sustainability concerns and resilience, systemic resilience, which, by the way, it's also mentioned in this paper on antitrust and social regulation as an objective, instead of efficiency. Yeah, I mean, which I think that shows that this work, and I think I don't want to say more. This work might be very interesting because it can combine both descriptive element in terms of metrics, new fields of new spaces, let's say, of units of analysis, and secondly, normative. So
fully agree. We
but
actually,
maybe Elena would like to.
Yeah. I just want to say that we started from this premise. We started the discussion from this normative prescription, and yes, and for blockades, they bet for sustainability of the system. And here, I turn to Elena, who can either confirm or disagree on blockage.
Yeah, first of all, let me thank everybody who commented on our talks. I think this is useful, and it's definitely, again, food for thought that we would take into consideration. I emphasize once again, this is a very, very early stage of the project, so it's not that we are putting forward some proposals, so that's not the purpose. So the purpose was to kind of reflect on what our current thinking is, to enrich it and to fine-tune it, let's say, like that. So interesting observations, I think, have been made. I can't go through all of them, but just a few, like, for example, using trophic levels to evaluate power in some sense. That's an interesting idea. So I mean, we saw trophic levels from slightly different perspective as I connected it with stability and that kind of line of thinking. But the power, one can also think, I guess, in these terms. We can try to think in that direction. I think the dynamics of the environment, that's another thing. I think we discussed it in our smaller group before. So that this interaction between agents and agents defining environment in the same manner as environment defines what happens to agents. So this reciprocal links obviously exist, and that's all about natural ecosystems. as well too. So some things that I think is useful to maybe be reminded in terms of how useful it is to abandon, or actually we never suggested to abandon market notions or economic models. We only want to enrich them, not abandon anything. But it's all about our concepts in our mind. For example, there is absolutely conventional standard theory of input-output analysis in economics, right? So everybody is familiar with input-output tables. They are collected, they are analyzed. Nowadays, by the way, there is a second wave of this analysis that is being developed in the context of sustainability again. So it allows to compute various footprints, for example, carbon footprints, water footprints, and so on. So it's a very useful methodology. And input-output analysis is using exactly the same, not similar, exactly the same mathematical tools as does the ecosystem analysis. So certain things we already use as routinely, and we don't question that already takes use or makes use out of this analogies between economic systems and ecological systems. It's only a matter of us being used to that or something being new. So that's one thing. But I think the main comment I wanted to make is that there are two ways how one can use, or many ways, but two ways in particular how one can use mathematical models or mathematical tools in general. So one can use it in a way how Ioannis wants to use them, and that is really this what is called computational antitrust in this case. So really use them as predictive tools, if I understand this right, also diagnostic tools, like really where numbers matter. Yeah, that's one line of development. And there one could really experiment with agent-based modeling, with network theory, as we discussed. So that's not exactly what we were talking about in this talk. So that line exists also and is worth developing. And we're also discussing with Ioannis on that as well. But that's in one line, but the other line is more conceptual, and this is where models actually is nothing else but a source of narratives. So models themselves don't matter so much. So they in the end, what matters is the narrative that they generate. And in history, we also know many examples when models themselves, nobody even remembers what the model was, or specialists remember, but not the broader public. But the narratives is what is being remembered. And so I think this kind of work can also inform such kind of new narratives that are needed apparently because of these challenges that you were discussing. So that's one purpose of this work, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If you don't have anyone, any kind of more comments, interventions here on other side of the screen. If not, because we're working already for quite a while and yeah, everyone a bit tired. We have to be cautious about our ecosystems as our bodies. Huh? Our bodies also ecosystems. They need some treatment, some care. Yeah. So maybe then we have to say each other goodbye. Yeah. Have a good day, night, wherever you are, and see you next week. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Okay, see you.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Have a good day.
It's a big group, huh? Which university?